Hey, so let's move on to something we've sort of alluded to already in terms of a first broader discussion around ageism in the workplace, and whether we use that anecdotally with generational titles or it has to do with honestly what we saw in our presidential election here in the U.S. with Biden dropping out and how that's been talked about from an age standpoint. And I know we've got some research on it as well. What is your experience? Let's even think about it from a recruiter standpoint, talent acquisition. Does ageism happen in the recruiting process? We're going to talk broadly as well for HR as a whole, but let's start with the recruiting process. What are you seeing?
Look, I think I've seen it. I've seen every type of ism, obviously, in recruitment, right? Isms are very real. I think with the challenge with ageism is I've seen it actually flip over the last decade where it used to be if you were a millennial, you were just a basement dweller and you could never get a job. And there was a lot of judgment. A lot of people were saying, a lot of stuff about millennials, but now
Yeah.
millennials are the hiring managers. And unfortunately, um, there's a lot of isms for those who are, older, right? And a lot of those thoughts are they're not going to adapt to technology, they're not going to be up to date, which makes no sense because the older you are, the more technological advances you've seen. You maybe you're gonna be hard to manage. I've seen that one. Like, let's say you're in your 30s and you're gonna hire someone who's in their 50s. Maybe there's a thought that they're gonna be difficult to hire. So I think what I've noticed from a lot of job seekers that I talk to who are older and they're kind of returning into the job search, they are really feeling the ageism in a major way. It's one of the
Mm.
biggest complaints that I hear. And the irony, one of the pieces of irony that I also see is companies always like, we want someone who's going to be around for 3 to 5 years. But I feel like the younger generation are the ones who are more likely to stay with a company for a short amount of time and then job hop strategically. Whereas those who are, maybe more seasoned, they might actually stay with a company until they retire, which could be 5 years. So I think it's extremely real in my experience. It's painful, but it's like this ageism thing. It switches, and it depends on who the hiring manager is a lot as well. So Danielle, what are your thoughts? Like, do you see ageism against Gen Z at all?
Yeah, I think so for sure. Especially in right this tougher moment right now for job seekers, there is a lot more talent on the market, and people are gonna, to John's point earlier, right? Like look at the person with 10 years of experience over the one with three. And I think that's a really harsh reality for a lot of Gen Zers who most of whom are, you know, or all of whom are under the age of 28. And so they have just less experience. And I think it's a really tough thing to live with because it's like, well, I can't change how many years of experience I have, right? But the other part of this equation is that people are working longer. And going back to what John mentioned about Biden, right? The conversation about Biden's mental fitness raises questions for me, at least, around whether we should be evaluating the mental fitness of the C-suite, right? When they or the board members when they get to a certain age. Yeah, hot take, because a lot of the time there is this fear of, retribution that if you question someone's mental fitness in the workplace, even if it is a very valid question, that you'll be fired and that those people have power, and if they have power and they're making decisions, they should be evaluated. I'm just gonna say it. And
How
just
how
like
how how would
people,
we evaluate them?
Right.
right, that's a question. I don't know. But I think to that
Count to
point,
10. If you can't count to 10, you're fired.
Listen,
I mean,
it's it's
it's
it's
very real too. Alzheimer's is on the rise.
for sure.
Dementia is a huge problem. It runs in my family. I'm speaking from the perspective of someone who
Yeah.
is a
Yeah.
child of two
Hmm.
parents that are at great risk of getting Alzheimer's. So it's from a point of also concern that, like, if the kids, or they don't have kids, if the kids aren't the ones catching it, then it's obviously affecting everyone that they're working with. So it comes from a good place of empathy. It's not a place of, well, you should be evaluated because, like, you're deteriorating quite fast, but it's more of a place of empathy and concern for the decisions and the behaviors that impact, and trickle down.
Resident old man. What do you John John is frozen 'cause, this is what I'm talking about, these
I
IT
shocked
problems
him.
with the older generation. It's too much for me right now. Um, it's interesting. Look, I sort of, think that there probably are ways to evaluate it, and I don't know. It's a mix. John, what do you think? We were making fun of you
I
behind
think,
the scenes.
yeah, I know. I'm sorry. Apologies. There's a storm coming my way, and it's messing with the internet. So, uh, I think Danielle brings up a great point. I think that a couple of thoughts I would say is we don't legislate empathy very well. And so it's really difficult for us to know how to approach someone gingerly. I mean, listen, I'm happy to have a hot take as well. You don't need to be a medical professional to have watched Biden's interactions to know we want to support him. We if this
Yeah,
were in a normal workplace, we would have approached him in the warehouse to say, Joe, we need to chat for a minute. That's what we would have done, right? We're not going to let him get behind the forklift. We're going to be concerned about disorientation. Like that's real. It should be no different at the presidency level either. It is a role,
yeah.
right? It's a job.
It was tough to watch him in that
It was
debate.
absolutely my heart went out to I don't care where you are politically. That is someone's dad, someone's grandfather. Like you would not want to see
Yeah.
that be the case for anyone. I but I would also say though, from an ageism standpoint, we do have a hard time with. Listen, 2 million at minimum, 2 million individuals return to work age 65 and older in 2023. 2 million people return to work part-time, yes, but they return to the workforce because 401ks weren't paying as much, eggs were $12 a dozen, like all of this stuff that people weren't prepared for in their retirement. They needed to come back to work for a bit. So we needed those individuals, quite frankly, to come back to work to help with some of the gaps that were becoming very evident. I would hope ageism on both ends of the spectrum isn't really the reason. um, and we can't let experience often is a prox dealt with by age, because we don't really know how many years of experience people self-report. I have 20 years of experience in something. Really, out of those 20, you did
Mhm.
this for 13. Like we're not
Yeah.
really sure. And I think we have to be thoughtful about the fact that from an experience standpoint, the older someone is does not necessarily mean the better they are or the wiser they are, or in the role. So I would be cautious about this being a primary, if at all. Certainly, though, would make the bias of it a primary. What's the alert factor for everybody? Well, let's look at the last 15 hires we've made. What's that like for us?
Mhm.
Where do we tend to lean? Let's see if we have patterns with particular hiring managers. I think that's helpful.